that personality of his actually served to take away from his legacy as a baseball player.
It always felt wrong. It's not fair to him.
He's just a gentle, kind soul.
He was loved by so many people in this country.
Total respect for Yogi, a guy that everybody loved, not because he was cute and funny, it's because he was good and he was real.
He is one of the greatest the game has ever seen. Yogi Berra won a record 10 World Series rings, 3 MVP awards, and appeared in 18 All-Star games. And he caught the only perfect game in World Series history. The new documentary, It Ain't Over, shares an intimate portrait of the man who is often remembered more for his unique personality than his career. Lindsay Berra is the executive producer and the narrator of the film. She is also Yogi's granddaughter. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. You know, we read about your dad's, your grandfather's playing accomplishments, right? And you read those statistics, and yet when people still talk about the greatest players in the history of the game, you know, it's almost, your grandfather is almost criminally underrated when those conversations take place. And why do you think that is? And was he ever cognizant of that?
I think there's just a recency bias problem. He played his last game in May of 1965, and then he spent 50 years as a manager, being quoted in the press saying funny things, being quoted by presidents saying funny things, doing commercials that really leaned into his personality and the Yogiisms. And I think that's what people remember most when they think about him, at least if you're under the age of 60, that's what you think about most often. And, you know, for me, the documentary is, you know, we point out all of Grandpa's amazing accomplishments on the field. It was my goal to really remind people just how great he was as a player, but then also to show folks that as good as he was on the field, he was actually a better human being.
How did the media treat him in his day?
Oh, God, they were not nice, and they would not get away with some of these things today. They said he looked like a gorilla, an ape, a fire hydrant, like a fat girl running in a too tight skirt. They said he was too ugly to be a Yankee. I don't know what that means. I think he was pretty cute when he was young. But Grandpa very famously said, "I never saw anyone hit with his face." There you go. Yeah, he was pretty able to let things roll off of his back, but they were certainly not kind to him.
I don't know how many people knew that he had served in the Navy and was there at DDay in Normandy. What did you learn? Did he talk about it a lot, or was it, because I know some World War II veterans were very reticent to talk about their experiences in World War II?
No, he did not talk about it much. And whenever anyone did ask him about it, he said it was like the 4th of July. And we all know that that's not true. It's what he said to kind of just answer the question and get people to move on to other things. But he was a machine gunner on an LCSS, Landing Craft Support Small, providing cover fire for our troops going ashore at Omaha Beach. And in the days following the invasion, once the beach was secure, his job was to pull the bodies of his fellow servicemen out of the water. I think it was an experience that certainly forever changed him, and I do think impacted him on the baseball field. He was known as one of the greatest clutch hitters of all time, and I think when you go through a real life or death experience, 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th is not pressure. He saw that just as opportunity, and quite frankly, he was grateful to be there when so many other men didn't have the chance to come home.
Yeah, you know, guys of that era, of that World War II era, and who fought in the war. I mean, Yogi had a contract, and he enlisted. He wasn't drafted. He enlisted, and it's such a difference. And I don't know that it's fair to compare athletes of today to that. It were different times, but I just wonder if that mindset and that, you know, commitment to sacrifice and all those experiences that your grandfather had, how did that shape his, you know, approach to baseball and his approach to being involved in the game?
So he did enlist. He enlisted on his 18th birthday. He was playing for the Norfolk Tars. He already had a Yankee contract in his hand, and on his 18th birthday, he literally just walked up to the big naval base in Norfolk and said, "Here I am." But I do think that service in the war, he was very proud as a first-generation Italian immigrant. He wanted to serve his country. And when he came home, knowing that so many other guys didn't come, it's come home. It just gave him this profound sense of gratitude. And he approached every day with such joy. He was very aware that he was playing a kid's game for a living, getting paid to do something that he loved. He would tell you he never worked a day in his life. And being able to do something like that after being involved with something like World War II and as significant as the D-Day invasion, I think it was just something he was very, very grateful for the rest of his life. He always just said he was blessed. So I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed.
How did he feel toward the end of his life towards the Yankees? Because it was somewhat of a tumultuous relationship. He obviously played for them. He managed for them. I imagine that. I was curious, just like, and at the end of the day, how did he feel about that organization?
They were very much his extended family. He did have his rift with George Steinbrenner, but as soon as George apologized in 1999, it was over. It was like it never happened. Okay. And he was able to go back to the stadium. He was there every homestand, every game. He was at spring training. He was able to kind of mentor Posada and Jeter and Bernie Williams and Tino Martinez and have new relationships with those guys who got to learn so much from him. But I also think that his ability to be with them gave him so much joy. I think it probably extended his life by about 10 years, and I'm super grateful for that. But he loved being there. He was great friends with all of his Yankee teammates, Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Phil Rizzuto, Hank Bauer, Moose Skowron for his entire life. Super important to him and really his extended family.
Wow. Well, for more, you can follow the links on your screen. Thank you so much. And there it is, at Lindsay Berra, if you want to get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks so much.